tools. But when it comes to anything that's emerging, which XR is definitely emerging and constantly changing, guess what? You have to get familiar with messing around with code again. So everything old is new again. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Give me 2 seconds. And this is what I didn't want you to see because thank you, Zoom. Okay. Oh, hold on. That's not what I wanted to do. Perfect. All right. So today, what I want to kind of talk to you about, and I'll show you examples of it, and then we can have a discussion later, and maybe even do some little demos if there's time, is this idea of creating immersive VR and AR, which you've never heard the term XR. It's just shorthand, so we don't have to say VR, MR, SR, and all the other Rs that come along. And what it's really, the theme today, I have talked a lot about virtual reality in the past at this conference and elsewhere. Today, I'm going to talk about how to do things in the browser, because the nice thing about some kind of new technologies that have kind of emerged over the last few years is that the browser is no longer stuck in a rectangle. If you think about it, all of our media is in these flat rectangles, and we grew up that way. But I think in 10, 20 years, people will look at that and say, gosh, you remember when everything was flat? Or kids will grow up and be like, what's that flat stuff? Because they'll be used to everything sort of breaking out of that rectangle and becoming immersive. But before we kind of go into the present and future, let's look at the last 5 years in VR. So it's been a really, there's been a lot of change over this time. In fact, when I first started talking about this and doing things in VR, I always had to explain what it was like. If you were in a room with me now, I'd probably ask for a show of hands and say, who's used a VR headset? And I bet roughly 60% of you would have had at least one experience. And the way that all really kind of started in roughly 2016 was when common people were able to start using VR. And it was primarily initially through the Oculus Rift. There was another system called the HTC Vive. And it was pretty amazing, groundbreaking, but it was also very limiting because first of all, you had to have $1,000 plus high-end Windows PC. You then had to buy the headset, which usually cost another, at least, I don't know, $650, $700. So you're talking really, big amounts of money. And you'd have a wire sticking out of the back of your head, almost like Neo in the Matrix when he took the, I think the red pill, yes. And then at the low end, Google came out with something, which is basically showing how you could turn your phone and the accelerometer into a VR headset. So if you ever had subscribed to the New York Times, or maybe through some kind of marketing, you may have gotten one of these headsets and you can see, oh, I can then immerse myself in usually a 360 video. So you had like these real big extremes. And what's changed over that time is that now you're starting to see these all-in-one $300-ish headsets. Facebook's Oculus Quest is kind of at the leading edge of that. Vive has a new system called Focus. You're starting to see more of these systems, and you just kind of buy it off the shelf. You can go to Best Buy, and then you connect your Wi-Fi. You have a browser in that thing, which I'm going to get to in a second, and you are then using virtual reality, right? But it's still something that it's another device, and you put it on your head. You're kind of socially isolated, so there's still some barriers, but there are no wires. Meanwhile, in the augmented reality space, if you look back roughly to around 2010 was when I first started seeing AR on your phone start to show up. And this is the beginning. I'm not going to get into the whole history of it. And yes, Pokemon Go is what really made a lot of people aware of AR. But I can remember in the early days, there was this app called Layar or Layer, another platform called Euphoria. And they would allow you to, using their proprietary systems in this walled garden, then create kind of 3D effects that would like characters, objects, things like that would pop up when you look at some kind of a QR code or a marker. And there were a lot of experiments. In fact, there might be some people in this room. I know that Retha Hill, who has spoken at this conference before, experimented with Layar. And there are a lot of experiments, but it was very proprietary and also super buggy. And so we didn't see a lot of people using it. But what really changed was in between 2017, 2018, Apple and Google introduced APIs and SDKs for their phones. So iOS was ARKit, Android was AR Core, and it let any developer, and this is kind of the key, right? So a software developer who could code apps could then start building augmented reality features into their apps, okay? So it's like one step away from proprietariness and that any developer could do it, but still kind of locked up, right? So you started to see in that period, there were dozens of experiments that major news organizations were engaged in. The New York Times, USA Today, Washington Post among them, but many others. And if they had developers that they had on their staff who could code apps, who could then learn how to use these features, then you start seeing these augmented reality features in news. But they weren't really you didn't see it kind of go down to the level of the daily newspaper in smaller towns or even mid-sized markets, right? There was maybe one or two experiments here or there. And why? Because it was expensive. You had to pay those developers to do things. Where we are today, I'm actually really excited about. This is usually when I get, in terms of innovations that I look at, when I get most excited is when things get really inexpensive or even free, and anybody who spends a little bit of time can start experimenting with the technology. And AR is now kind of entering that third stage. And I'm going to show you just a few examples of some of these, but these three icons you see down here, Sketchfab. If you're not aware of Sketchfab, think of it as like the YouTube of 3D models. And so just like anybody, YouTube let people upload any video and share it with people. With Sketchfab, you can share models and increasingly experiences to anybody who has a browser on any device, okay? And what makes that possible is some underlying technologies that are now in every major browser. So Chrome, Firefox, Safari, even Opera. There are still people using Opera, believe it or not. And it's actually called a WebGL. But there are other kind of frameworks that get built up by developers that then make it possible for you to just start putting little codes into your HTML pages. And I'm going to show you examples of what I, along with some students that I guided in the last year, have done with something called A-Frame, which is created by Mozilla, and then Model Viewer, which is something that's created by Google. But it's all about making cool stuff happen in the browser. So this is just kind of one example of what I've done recently, and I'm going to show more of this. A project called Visualizing 81. If you would like to kind of take this with you, you can scan that QR code. It'll take you to the actual story. It's on your phone. It's a 5-part kind of like an enterprise piece about this highway, a highway overpass, so Interstate 81, that in the 1960s was built at the expense of basically raising a 40 square block area that was primarily African American. And they didn't even relocate the people. They just sometimes would give them a few $100s, and they had to kind of find their way, right? So, I mean, it's, in these last couple years, I mean, this is kind of what I think critical race theory and Black Lives Matter and all of those different movements have been trying to make people aware of, is that our history, there's systemic racism built into our history. And this is something we wanted to really connect people in Syracuse with, so that they understood, okay, well, what happens when that overpass comes down? Because it's reached the end of its useful life, and most likely it will be turned into what they call a community grid. And so there's an opportunity to kind of heal some of those wounds in the past. And we thought, well, there can't really be healing and smart planning for equitable future unless people really understand the history. So it was a great opportunity for using immersive media. So here's kind of a high level just walkthrough of that piece. It starts off, it works on anything with a browser, so desktop, mobile, whatever. And we're using what's called a Lottie animation as you kind of scroll through. And we're showing visualizations of what basically the area known as the 15th ward that was then destroyed. What you saw there really quickly, and we're actually working on this still, we've worked with the architecture school to create a 3D model of all of Syracuse. I'm gonna pause this. So there's a lot more we can do with this, but it basically takes you kind of through that, let's see here, let's try that again. Through that part of Syracuse, and then you end up at seeing a picture of what it's like now. We then took 360 cameras, and keep in mind, this is all in a web browser. This is one of the things I wanted to make people aware of. You can take a 360 photo that you develop with any 360 camera, which are much less expensive, and basically publish it on the web, right? So you don't need to have any platform. You don't need to have any kind of vendor that you use. You can just use A-frame. And what we did here, and I'll show you examples of how this works, is we have overlaid historical photos from the past showing the African-American residents of that area. You can kind of see right here who lived in that area, right? So we kind of start at a high level and then take you down to into the past. And then the next steps are we take you in it. So and we're kind of jumping around the story. I encourage you to just go through, read the story. It actually just won the Associated College Press Association Multimedia News Story of the Year, which we're very proud of, but that's the level that it's at. And there's one part of the story where you you learn about this church that was kind of central to the civil rights movement at that time in the 1950s. It goes back to 1910. It's called the AME Church of Zion. And we used some technology known as photogrammetry. We basically took thousands of pictures of the inside of this church. And what you're seeing here is that if you have an Oculus Quest, you can basically go to visualizing81.com and then in a browser. So this is the view from a browser looking at that same piece. And then when you see a VR icon appear, then you can kind of jump inside some of those elements. So A-Frame is the open source code library that makes this possible. But what's nice is that, even if you don't know HTML, if you have a web designer working with you, you can point them to A-Frame and then say, hey, can we do this? Also, here's the template, because I'm going to give everybody the code for this. And then you can, in this case, you're teleporting around the inside of the church, and you're taken inside. From a storytelling perspective, this church is important because it's being renovated to be a training center for African-American youth who want to go into, the restaurant space. So there's a lot more we can do with this, but this was one kind of critical piece that we introduced in this story. Next thing I want to show you here is, actually, first of all, who's heard these comments? This is about any type of innovation. I've been hearing these excuses from people, whether it's bosses or colleagues for anything, but with XR, we see it all over again, right? It's like, okay, well, we can't really do anything with VR AR because it's too hard. The audience is too small. It's such a new field. Oh, we don't really have the technical staff to do this. And by the way, if you have anyone who knows how to code basic HTML, you have it. That's what I wanted. I say this. There's no excuse. This is an excuse for you to play with toys. That's a common way that people try to avoid doing anything new. It's unethical to recreate reality is something that continually comes up in the XR space. And my favorite, we're a journalism company, not a technology company. Well, guess what? If you're in media or journalism, you have to also be a technology company. You are, because it's all digital. What if you could do all the kind of things I'm showing you for free using existing resources and volunteered time, right? It sounds a little crazy, but that's what we did with students over the last year. So what I'm showing you with Visualizing 81 wasn't even part of a class. It was a group of about 5 students who signed up, who wanted to work on this piece. And We also kind of curated some people at other schools. So the architecture school has 3D modelers. They were interested in storytelling around spaces. And all the technology, though, for the most part, was open source. And what made it possible is WebXR. So I mentioned, A-Frame, Sketchfab, Model View. The reason they're important is that they allow any web page to display highly interactive 3D content. And so you can display the 3D content in your living room. I'll show you examples of that in a second. That's with the AR piece, or allow people to walk inside it in a VR headset. And who knows what else in the future. So there are other types of XR that you're going to be hearing about in the future. One of them is sometimes called simulated reality. And imagine that, here's what simulated reality is. Imagine that there are multiple cameras on the front of your laptop or your phone, just like you have them on the back of your phone. And those cameras are trained to watch what each one of your eyes are seeing. And then they do a little magic to kind of change what you're seeing slightly so that the content, if it's 3D enabled, literally jumps out of the screen. You don't need to have a headset on. You just have to look at the screen, okay? So I'm confident that WebXR will also be able to support SR and things like that. So let's break down some of these. I like to think of new technologies as superpowers, because everybody wants to be a superhero, and we all are. So let's break them all down. But I want to give you a trigger warning. You're going to be exposed to some HTML. You can handle it. All right, this is my Dr. Evil. It's like, this is my evil plan. I really want people to, dust off those learning HTML books and jump back into it. Because once you see what you're able to do and how simple it is, why would you not want to? So first we have the web embeddable photogrammetry. That's the church I was showing you. What I showed you before was, well, what does it look like if you're in a VR headset? This is, if you're just on a regular computer, you get to this section about the church, and without having to go to a different link or anything, you can just use your WAS and D keys to move around, right? So think about what you could do with this, with a variety of stories. Obviously anything with history, right? Anything where you can get access as a journalist to somewhere that other people can't, right? It doesn't have to be a serious story. I was just talking with a journalist recently who somehow was given access to one of Ricky Martin's houses, a tour with Ricky Martin. Well, what if you could go in and actually get permission to 3D image it, which is becoming easier and easier. Once you have that, you can put that information, just embed it into a story, right? And make it more immersive so people then feel more connected to that content. So that's web embeddable photogrammetry. To get started with photogrammetry, it's sort of like a pro and an amateur method. So the pro is some software called reality capture. I'm going to show you some screenshots of how that works now. It used to be really expensive, but actually Unreal Engine is integrating it because the parent company of Unreal Engine, Gaming Engine, bought reality capture. And I think the price is going to come down. But from just I won't call it amateurs, more professional amateur level. If you have an iPhone 12 Pro that has a LiDAR on it, you can actually create some really compelling photogrammetry of objects in particular. So what I'd say is, if you have an iPhone 12 Pro and you want to do something around arts journalism, if you can get access to sculptures, you could actually 3D image them all in about 10 minutes. And then with a little bit of just copy and paste different programs, embed them into a story, and then people can then experience that content and project it into their space, right? So I call that the Everywhere Museum. Super exciting, and I have a bunch of different projects underway with that. In terms of embedding photogrammetry in a web page, you can use A-Frame, which I'll show you in a second, and then you publish it into GitHub pages. So this is something that now at Newhouse, through a Foundations of Data and Digital Journalism class, we're actually teaching every new sophomore how to use GitHub, and then basically publish stuff to the web through GitHub for free. And with those same tools, you can do the same thing. So you don't need to even pay $8 a month. You can just do it for free. This here, so on the pro side, is a kind of a view of a totally different story that we were working on about an artist studio. And everything you're going to see here, well, you're going to see the whole process of using reality capture. So it starts off with, this is the interface. If you look at the upper right, you see what's called a point cloud. But really what you do is you go all around the outside of a room looking in with a regular DSLR camera. And as long as your photos have 40% overlap, then this software can then tell which direction the pictures were taken. So if you look at these triangles that you see in here, or more like pyramids, that's the software's guess as to what direction the camera was facing. And then it creates a 3D model, but it's a 3D model that you can then move through. So it's really almost like a 3D or holographic photo. So there's kind of a closer view as we're moving through in the software of what you see. And then this is going through that 3D model in a standard web browser like you saw before. And what I'm doing here, you can see the mouse hand there. I'm just using arrow keys and the mouse to move around, okay? So it's not perfect, but pretty amazing and pretty, good enough to make people understand a space, right? And then once you have, you publish that to the web, as you saw before, you can then jump inside of it with an Oculus Quest. In this case, I uploaded it into Sketchfab, and sketchfab.com has built-in ability for VR. So now in a Quest, you can teleport around. So you'll see my VR hands there sometimes. And wherever you place that laser pointer, you can move through it, right? So from a photographer's perspective, if you're in photojournalism, think about what this means for your job and also for the value you can deliver to your viewers, right? You can take people places just with your camera as long as you know how to use this kind of software. And let's see here. I think there's one more. Oh. This is going on a little bit longer than I thought. Let me move. Oh, here we go. Yeah, and so over here, what I want to show you is how you can, it zooms, I think, funny. So here's a 3D model that one of my arts journalism students produced. And in Sketchfab, if you click the USDZ mode on your phone, it projects it into your room. So it has built-in augmented reality. Right, so now it looks like this statue of African warriors with spears is right there in my room, right? So I've been reaching out to a lot of artists lately and saying, hey, how would you like to have your museum be available anywhere, right? And kind of how I see this evolving is that, okay, you have objects, and then you can click something, you hear the artist talking about what that object is, how they made it, its significant importance. It could be a history lesson, any number of things. 2 seconds here. Having Zoom issues. Okay. So that church that I mentioned, the Visualizing 81, we also 3D imaged the outside of it. And I don't even use the term 3D scan anymore because we didn't use scanners. We just used photos from a DSLR. And so there you can see the outside of the church. This is in my living room literally 2 days ago, and I can then place it into my living room and walk around it. I think this was created with about 500 photos, if I remember. The biggest challenge we had was that it was supposed to be, we thought we'd need a drone in order to get photos from above. We couldn't get legal access to that space because of some hospitals nearby. And so as a result, we just basically, we found a parking garage across the street, and the photos from the parking garage were good enough, right? So never assume that just because you don't, something doesn't work out the way that you think it needs to, that it's just that there's no way around it. So how do you get started with web AR? There are a number of different ways, but I like the basically you need to have use an app that would then get your content into one of two formats. There's GLTF, that's for primarily Android, and then there's USDZ. Oh, somebody just asked a question here. I see, is it possible to use SketchUp to build a basic model of a space like a city and then embed it into a website? It is. So as long as you then export it as a GLTF and a USDZ, then yes, you can do it. And I'm going to show you the next slide how that works. So for the USDZ format, though, you need to have a Mac. So you cannot do this on a Windows computer, right? This is very Apple. But they have a piece of software called Reality Converter, and you basically just drag your GLTF into it and it spits out a USDZ. Fun thing about USDZ, that model format was built in conjunction with Pixar. So the relationship between Apple through Steve Jobs and Pixar, it never ended apparently. Yeah, and then you use this code with Google Model Viewer, and you then put that code into your web page. From the Pro-Am side, this is a piece of software, actually an app called Turnio, T-R-N-I-O. I think it costs $3, but totally worth it. You're not going to get as good of quality, but this is just a kind of figurine of an elephant that I have in my living room. As you can see, I can scan it and then I can place it in my living room and then walk around it. And that was kind of a 5-minute job. Right. So there's no reason not to get started with this kind of thing now. This here is, so what I'm going to show you here is the Google Model Viewer Editor. So what you see in the middle is basically you take your GLTF file and you drag it into this. And the editor is just on a web page, by the way. So you just go to that link that I show here on the left, and it's going to bring it up. And so you then find your GLTF, you drag it into the space, and then as you're, so you'll see it kind of here, so you drag it in, and then the Google Model Viewer will write the code for you on the right. So, okay, so there's my GLB is the same as a GLTF. There we go. It's also a great way to see your model, by the way. This 3D image of a bench on Syracuse University was only about 30 photos that created that, by the way. It's 30 traditional 2D photos. So then once you have that code, you just copy and paste it into your web page. Notice I'm doing this in HTML. I am not doing it in something like WordPress. The reason for that is that tools like WordPress don't currently let you necessarily copy this kind of code into them for security reasons, but you can do it in your own HTML template, put it in GitHub, and then it's live in like 10 minutes. So that's the free Google Model Viewer. I think we'll be seeing more things like that in the future. For web embeddable 360, if you have a 360 camera, you can get a lot of them for relatively low amount of money. Insta360.com has a lot of great options. You can get cameras for as little as I think $200. And once you have that 360 video, uploading to YouTube actually works very well. With A-Frame, which is this open source library, it doesn't do a great job with 360 video yet. I have a feeling that will change over time. But with 360 photos, it does a really good job. So I'm not going to show this right now, but if you scan that and you have the YouTube app on your phone, what you'll be basically taken into YouTube and you'll see a 360 of a dance that happened at a cultural center here in Syracuse. And that's part of a project where it's this larger everywhere museum initiative I'm working on, where we want to take La Casita anywhere. So we're going to have QR codes and little mini exhibits that we put in different places on the university and maybe in town. And then people can experience a part of it on their phone just by holding it up. So 360 video, that's the best method currently. For 360 photos, what I'm going to show you here is the historical photo fades, how we did it. So basically, we're using A-Frame. So if you go to aframe.io, that's where you can get the A-Frame code. But they have examples you can click on, and you can then just see examples of web VR. So here's a 360 photo inside there. And at the upper right, actually, I'm sorry, lower right, if you go into VR, it takes you to VR, but view source, you can see all the code right there that makes this. And I know that maybe not everyone's crazy about code, but I just want to point out, this is extremely simple code. Even if you haven't coded in, say 20 years, if you ever used MySpace, this is like a million times easier than modifying your MySpace page. And if you're new to code, just look at how simple this is. You have, okay, a sky in a JPEG file, you have the rotation, and then you have the font that appears on it, right? So using just that, we were able to embed 360 photos into a page. And then the way we do the historical photo fade is we actually have two versions of the photo. One of them is the present. Okay, so here you see the raw output of the present. And then the second one, we used Adobe Photoshop has some panel features, and we put these historical photos in there and applied the right projection. And then in the HTML, there's one little line that A-Frame supports that basically fades the JPEG on the inside in and out. And I think that so you can see that here. And then you can see there's the current photo, right? So look at how simple that is. And then the inside photo, there's one little thing at the bottom that basically says, fade this in and out, okay? So yes, you do need to know what those codes are, but the great thing about HTML is you can always view source, right? And you can start figuring these things out, which is exactly what I and my students did. You can also create 360 photo tours. So this was, if you look in Visualizing 81, you'll see a place where it talks about the future and how there are some places that are still going to be cut off by a highway, and you can kind of look through all the different pictures by clicking these floating messages in there. That was also done with A-Frame, and the code to do it is also incredibly simple. And we started by doing this with a tour through Newhouse. So I just took a bunch of pictures outside, and then we have links that kind of take you to different places. It's really no different. And what I want to show you here is this is sort of a Wizard of Oz moment. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, right? Those are all just cubes that have text on them, and they click. Okay, so this is sort of like behind the smoke and mirrors of the code. And this is really how I think innovation happens, and why it's important, even for non-coders, to just view the source of some of these websites and just start looking at it. And when you can, sometimes you'll find if you see they're using A-Frame, it's not going to be as hard as you might think. So that's all fun and neat, but so what? Why does this matter? So I have 3 general thoughts on that, and then we can move into Q&A. The first, and you may have heard me say this before, we are 3D creatures in 3D space, but our media is stuck in rectangles, right? And yes, we're all used to that because we grew up that way. But I really think that we're going to see this change, especially for younger generations. So the good news is, there's new, easy, and fun ways to start breaking out of the rectangular box. And I just showed you a few of them, but there are many, many more. And just watch this space. You're going to see just a plethora of different solutions out there for the next few years. Number 2, every web page that can contain a story can be enhanced with augmented reality and some virtual reality today for free. So if you work at some media company or journalism company and your boss says, oh, we don't have all those arguments I showed you, I've just shown you how you can answer all of them, right? It's not too expensive. It's not too difficult. The code is all free. And if you and others are willing to just jump in there, maybe even talk with your company's web designer, teach them, show them what's possible, and they'll probably start messing around with it. Third, every company, actually, every major tech company and most media companies are preparing for something called the metaverse. You may have heard this term. It's not a new term. It was actually created by Neil Stephenson, a science fiction author back in the 90s. But everyone from Facebook to Amazon to others are kind of talking about this idea of metaverse. Basically, what it means is you're entering all these XR components will sort of start sneaking their way into things like Facebook so that you can then virtually be next to somebody, move beyond Zoom and actually have your avatar, physically present. And, the way I look at it is, why would you not want to be a part of that future when these companies like, this was in the Wall Street Journal just last week in the future of everything. And they talked about how all these tech visionaries are working on immersive XR, where you're physically, you feel like you're physically next to people. And this was just a week ago as well. Facebook is hiring 10,000 people just in the EU alone to build the metaverse, right? Love or hate Facebook, they are a big player, one of the biggest, and they won't be the only one. So they're claiming it's going to be very cross-platform and open and everything. Expect there to be lots of different aspects of the metaverse. At some point, maybe they come together. I predict it'll be a company like Mozilla that created A-Frame that does it. So that's all I have for you today, and open things up for Q&A now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. That was really great. I will start the questions. Do I look cool in this? That's my question.
Look at you.
With the little headset here. All right. No, I'm just teasing. This is our illustrious photographer who gave this let us show this off. But anyway, you had mentioned something earlier about, kind of sort of selling this to your editors or selling this in your newsroom. And you had a list of excuses, but what do you think had been how do you sell it, especially if you're in a small newsroom and you have some?
Yeah, well, in my personal opinion, you just do it using HTML, publish it to your GitHub page, and then show them the link. Show, don't tell is always the best way. And it's always best to just make something, simple and small, but try to use that to then show somebody in sort of a sneaky way how limited their thinking is, right? Because and if they're smart, they'll be like, maybe I should give Hunter, so I'm just pulling names out randomly, a day to work on this. That sounds interesting, right? Because at the end of the day, your editors probably, they have their own metrics. They need to drive audience or revenue and this and that, right? And so if you can show them, hey, here's a way that you can do this, especially with AR, on anyone's phone, they can be projecting these pictures as 3D, 3D immersive models in their space, and we don't even need to get a vendor. They're going to listen. If they don't, you might want to find somewhere else to work, in my opinion.
No, thank you.
Okay,
go ahead, sorry.
So I just saw a question come up, so I was reading it.
Okay, great. Yeah, Alex asked, do you think that we will have augmented reality in our glasses or contacts at some point? For example, we can walk through life, but see links from QR codes as we walk past a table, or see art pieces in a city that aren't really there.
I do, and I think it really is coming down to, it's not, is it possible? Because we know it's possible. We've seen it with HoloLens, and then Magic Leap, that everybody thought was dead, actually just said it's coming out with a second headset. It looks smaller. Apple is definitely working on augmented reality glasses. And I personally still think it's going to be Apple that, just based on what I've seen, that really takes this to the masses, with glasses that basically let you see content that is available, that's supported by the iPhone, that instead of just tapping to view the model in your space, there will be an option to then, see in my space. Oh, if you have Apple glasses, you'll put them on and you'll just see the objects there. The technology is like, it's not a mystery anymore. Companies are doing it today, but the headsets are very, very dense. Contacts, who knows? I'm not a medical doctor, but that could be kind of cool. Although I don't personally want to wear contact lenses again. But good thinking. This is the, very future-focused thinking. Love it.
Didn't Google have their Google glasses, right? And you could wear them and like walk through Chicago airport and see stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, the question is, will Google get back into that? Because that was such an embarrassment for them with consumers. Google Glass actually never died. It just moved into the enterprise space. Magic Leap didn't die. It also went enterprise. HoloLens didn't die. It just was adopted by the military, although the military is pulling back because they're waiting for the technology to get better. And it's just like everything else, once it becomes, just like even like the AirPods that I'm wearing, think 4 years ago, the idea of having Bluetooth connected, buds you stick in your ears without any wires, sounded like, wow, that would be really hard, right? There are all these companies are working on that now for glasses, and it'll come out. Snapchat actually has some pretty new glasses. I haven't been able to try them yet, but they have augmented reality built into them. So it's coming.
What's the financial investment? Say, a young smart reporter wants to, or a middle-aged woman wants to do this. What's a, investment? How much can I expect to spend if I kind of want to do this on my own a little bit?
You're talking about like your own or as a company?
Well, no, I mean, like either way. I mean, if I'm a small newsroom, and what's the minimum investment? How much is it going to?
Well, I'm willing to bet that everyone in that newsroom has an iPhone or an Android phone, right? They all have computers. And I think it's primarily some maybe investment in some basic training in how web pages work, going outside of the CMS, which is something that, let's be frank, with media consolidation, there's been less and less in that, and more of, okay, you're not allowed to mess with code. You have to use, this tool, and most journalists are just happy to do that. But those who know what I'm talking about, and I'm sure there are some of you here. In fact, I know there are some of you here, like Amy Schmitz-Weiss. If you are familiar, if you're just a little familiar with code, it's not hard to then, you can cut and paste little snippets, and then you push a couple buttons, and then they're up there. So I personally am investing some time in my job as a journalism educator to just put together some kind of tips and tricks on kind of how to get started. I'm actually working on a book called Experimenting with Emerging Media Platforms coming out in a year that will kind of take people through this process. The major investment is individuals' time and continued learning, right? But what's great is that they don't have to buy anything. You can start re-familiarizing yourself with very simple code today, and maybe with a little bit of guiding, which I'm helping with it. I think others are too. Find the right guide. There are people who would love to just kind of show, get you started, because it makes us very excited, right? Because the internet is not supposed to work the way it's working right now. It's not supposed to be all controlled by these large companies, right? It's not supposed to be, building blocks, created for children where you just hit 3 buttons and then do something. It was never designed that way. And those of us who have seen the evolution know that it started off with people like us, being excited about the possibilities, and then viewing the source code on web pages and then making our own. For all of these new technologies, that's still important, and we've forgotten that.
No, thank you. Another question
Frank Robertson,
from Chad.
I saw the thumbs up. Okay.
So from Chad Davis, have you approached your local public media PBS or NPR station about collaborating on spatial media content?
I actually have. So it just so turns out in Syracuse, the president of WCNY is a guy named Mitch Gelman, and he actually worked at the museum before, and before that he worked at Gannett, and he was one of the ones also responsible for Harvest of Change. So we have talked about what we can do together, right? But that's just sort of like this, who would have thought that our worlds would have come back together again? But I think, I think a lot of local, as far as NPR goes, at Syracuse University, we actually took over the radio station. So I'm going to be talking with them about what we can do. I didn't really mention spatialized audio, but that is another aspect of augmented reality that I think is worth looking into. And for public radio in particular, I think there are a lot of opportunities around that. And that spatial audio means, imagine that you could close your eyes and you hear sounds around you. And as you walk towards them in your mind's eye, they feel like they're coming out of a certain place. If anyone here has used spatial audio, you kind of know the magic of it. It's like really cool stuff. And that's something I'd encourage pretty much any radio station to just start experimenting with.
Sorry, that's really cool. We have about 10 minutes left. I just want to take a quick break. Oh, actually, David. Hey, David. He has a question. Did I understand correctly that AR, VR, and SR content can't be embedded or displayed in WordPress sites? Many small independent sites use WordPress, and he's definitely referring to a lot of SINN members using something like WordPress.
So it actually, I oversimplified it. It can be if you're hosting your own WordPress site, okay? But what often happens is that if either your IT department, or in the case of WordPress.com, if you're using WordPress.com or another commercial service like Squarespace is something that a lot of our students use, or Wix, for security reasons, they disable JavaScript and embeds because those can also be, if they open it for everyone, they're afraid that the systems could be hacked, and sometimes it happens. It really comes down to the JavaScript being embedded though. So if you can upload stuff into a GitHub page, and I'll just put this in here, if you just go to this link, github.com, I encourage everybody to just do this on their own. Do what that page tells you to do. What'll happen at the end is, first you make a GitHub account, and then you make what's called a repository, which is basically a folder in the cloud. And you give it the same name as your username. So mine is drpacheco.github.io. It kind of walks you through it. And by the end of it, you then basically have a free page where you can put immersive stuff that's going to work with anyone who has a link. And you can take that URL and embed that into WordPress. And then that's one way to kind of get around some of those restrictions.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. So a couple of quick announcements, everyone. We have our next presentation starting in just a few minutes. Please feel free to hang out with fabulous Dan here as he will stay around for just a few more minutes, right? Or maybe another 2 hours.
Yeah, I can stay around as long as, I'm here, and I'm fine if, we want to kind of make it more open afterwards. And, I use Zoom all the time, so.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much. So Dan will stay here. You guys, then the next presentation starts at 10 on evolving products. You're welcome to stay and hang out or make your way over. I will say that we did have a winner of our first Starbucks gift card, and that's Alex Sir. So congratulations, Alex. Sir, appreciate your attendance this morning, and congratulations on your coffee.
That's a lot of coffee, $50.
Well, depends on what you get, right? And Dan, we've been asking everyone, kind of ending our session. I have a great question to ask everyone. Please feel free to answer this as well. Would you rather give your parents or your boss access to your browser history?
Probably my parents.
Any particular reason why?
They'd understand me better than my boss.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today, Dan. And I will officially leave and you guys can talk about me. See you later.
Okay. All right.
Bye-bye. Thanks. Good to see you.
You too.
Really helpful, Dan. Particularly the page's GitHub URL. That's great.
Yeah. That came out of that Foundations of Data and Digital Journalism class. We had to figure out a way to basically make things easier. And what we discovered is, wow, it just unlocks tons of potential.
Fantastic.
And then once you have that, look this up. Netlify is a space where in one click, you can then deploy stuff from your GitHub repository to a domain name, but it's on Netlify and it's like it has SSL built in. So if you actually look at a lot of the Visualizing 81 content in the source code, which we also be doing more of, you'll see a lot of Netlify links, and we use that for that. and it costs us $0. So,
Hey, Dan,
and 0 cents.
how far back, 6 months ago, a year ago, are the browsers that can handle this now? And so when you embed AR, VR in the browser, what group of the population can easily see it?
I mean, this has gone back like about, I'd say 3+ years. This has been
Really?
possible.
Okay.
Maybe even longer than that. And the reason you haven't really seen a lot of it yet is that the code to create this kind of immersion was harder. And so it was really 3JS, it's like 3.js was the first code library that allowed a lot of the stuff to happen. It's basically a whole lot of really complicated JavaScript. And so you saw some places experimenting with it, but it's usually, you know, a really hardcore developer who knows JavaScript. And so what's happened is then you have these other layers that have kind of been built up on top of that. And A-Frame is a library that basically makes it really simple to put simpler codes together, more like HTML, that surface JavaScript from 3JS. So, yeah.